November 3rd, 1966. Thursday night, just after 9. Frank Lucas sat across from Bumpy Johnson at a corner table in Small's Paradise, a jazz club on 135th Street and 7th Avenue. The place was packed, maybe 60 people. The Thelonious Monk Quartet was playing on the small stage in the back. Smoke hung in the air like fog. Bumpy was eating ribs, slow, methodical, the way he did everything. Frank was drinking bourbon, watching the door. Always watching the door. That's what Bumpy had taught him. Never sit with your back to an entrance. Never relax completely. Never assume you're safe just because you're surrounded by people. But tonight felt different. The music was good. The food was good. Bumpy was in a rare mood, almost cheerful. He'd been telling Frank stories about the old days, back in the 1940s when he was fighting Dutch Schultz for control of the numbers racket. Frank was laughing, actually laughing. Then the door opened, and 8 men walked in. Frank saw them first, recognized the walk, the way they moved, tight, purposeful, hands near their waistbands. The lead man was tall, maybe 6'3", with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Frank knew him. Everyone in Harlem knew him. Vincent Razor DeLuca, one of Dutch Schultz's old enforcers who'd survived the purge when Schultz got killed in 1935. Razor had been quiet for years, laying low, but word on the street was he'd been building a crew again. Young guns, hungry, stupid, the kind of men who thought reputation was built on bodies instead of respect. Razor and his 7 men didn't stop at the bar, didn't sit down. They walked straight toward Bumpy's table. The jazz band kept playing, but the conversations around them started to die. People noticed. People always noticed when violence was about to happen. Frank's hand moved toward his waistband. He carried a .38 Special, loaded, always loaded. Bumpy didn't carry a gun, never did. Said guns made you careless, made you think you had power when all you really had was noise.
Razor stopped 3 feet from the table. His men spread out behind him in a semicircle. All of them had their hands inside their jackets. Frank could see the outlines, pistols. Maybe 2 of them had shotguns under their coats. This wasn't a conversation. This was an execution. Razor looked at Bumpy, didn't acknowledge Frank at all, like he didn't exist. "Bumpy," Razor said. His voice was rough, cigarette damaged. "Been a long time." Bumpy wiped his hands on a napkin, set it down carefully, looked up at Razor like he was a waiter asking about dessert. "Vincent, how have you been?" "Good, real good. Getting better every day." Razor smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "You know why I'm here." Bumpy nodded slowly. "I have an idea." Razor leaned forward slightly. "You took something from me, from Dutch, from all of us, 30 years ago. You and Madame St. Clair. You pushed us out of Harlem, took the numbers, took everything." Bumpy said, "Dutch is dead, Vincent. Been dead for 31 years. This isn't about Dutch." Razor's voice got quieter. "This is about respect. You disrespected us, treated us like we didn't matter, and now I'm back, with enough men to finish what Dutch started." Frank's hand was on his gun now. He hadn't drawn it yet, but his fingers were wrapped around the grip. His eyes scanned the room. 60 people. Most of them were regular folks, came here to listen to jazz and forget about their problems. But maybe 10 of them were Bumpy's people. Men who owed Bumpy favors. Men who'd die for him if it came to that. Frank tried to do the math. 8 gunmen versus 10 of Bumpy's people, plus Frank. Bad odds. A lot of people were going to die. Bumpy set his fork down, pushed his plate away slightly, then did something Frank would never forget. He started laughing. Not a nervous laugh, not a fake laugh, a real, genuine laugh, deep and loud enough that people 3 tables away turned to look. Razor's face darkened. "What's funny?" Bumpy wiped his eyes, shook his head. "I'm sorry, Vincent. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the situation." "What situation?" Bumpy gestured around the room. "You came here with 8 men, 8 guns, ready to kill me in front of all these people, And you think that makes you dangerous? Razor's jaw tightened. I am dangerous. No, Bumpy said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. You're predictable.
Frank didn't move, didn't breathe. He watched Bumpy like he was watching a magic trick he couldn't figure out. Bumpy leaned back in his chair, relaxed, like he was explaining something to a child. Vincent, you made a mistake, a big one. You came into my restaurant, my neighborhood, surrounded me with guns, and you think that gives you power. Razor said, It does. Bumpy shook his head. No, it gives you a decision. You can shoot me right now, kill me in front of 60 witnesses, and then what? Razor didn't answer. Bumpy continued. You kill me, and these people see it. They see you murder an unarmed man eating dinner. What do you think happens next? You think you walk out of here? You think my people let you leave? Razor glanced around the room. For the first time, Frank saw doubt in his eyes. Bumpy pressed. Even if you make it out, even if you kill me and escape, what then? You go home? You sleep? You think Harlem forgets? You think these people forgive? Razor's hand twitched toward his jacket. Bumpy didn't flinch. Let me tell you what happens, Vincent. You shoot me. Maybe you kill Frank, too. Maybe you kill 3 or 4 other people in the chaos. Then you run. You hide. But you can't hide from an entire neighborhood. You can't hide from 200 people who saw your face tonight, who know your name, who know where you live. You'll have 48 hours, maybe less. Then someone will find you. Maybe one of my people, maybe the police, maybe just a kid from the block who wants to be a hero. And you'll die in an alley somewhere, alone, forgotten. Is that what you came here for? The room was silent now. Even the jazz band had stopped playing. Razor's men were looking at each other, looking at the crowd, realizing that Bumpy was right. They were surrounded, not by guns, by witnesses, by people. Bumpy leaned forward. But let's say you don't shoot me. Let's say you walk out of here right now, turn around, leave. What happens then? Nothing. You go home, you live, you get to see tomorrow. Your men get to see their families. Nobody dies tonight. Isn't that a better deal? Razor's hand was shaking now, just slightly, but Frank saw it. So did Bumpy. Vincent, Bumpy said softly, you came here to prove you're tough, to prove you're not afraid of me. You've done that. Everyone in this room knows you had the guts to walk in here, to confront me. That takes courage. I respect that. But killing me doesn't make you powerful. It makes you dead. Walking away, that takes wisdom. Razor stared at Bumpy for a long moment. The scar on his face looked darker in the dim light. Then, slowly, he straightened up, stepped back. His men hesitated, looked at him, waiting for the order. Razor turned and walked toward the door. His men followed. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The door opened, closed. They were gone. The entire thing had lasted maybe 3 minutes. The jazz band started playing again, slowly, tentatively. Conversations resumed. Bumpy picked up his fork and went back to eating his ribs like nothing had happened. Frank sat there, his hand still on his gun, his heart pounding. He looked at Bumpy. Boss, what just happened? Bumpy chewed, swallowed, took a sip of water. I showed him something he didn't know he needed to see. What? That violence is easy. Walking away is hard. Frank holstered his gun, leaned back. But what if he didn't walk away? What if he pulled the trigger? Then we'd all be dead right now, including him. Bumpy looked at Frank, and that would have been a waste. Frank said, You weren't scared at all, were you? Bumpy smiled. Terrified, but fear is only useful if you control it. If it controls you, you're already dead. Frank sat with that for a moment, then said, You didn't even reach for a weapon. Didn't have to. Bumpy gestured around the room. I had 60 weapons.
Every person in here was watching. If Razor pulled that trigger, he wouldn't have made it to the door. He knew that. I just made sure he knew that I knew that. Over the next 10 years, Frank would think about that night more than any other. Not because of the danger, he'd been in danger plenty of times, but because of how Bumpy handled it. No threats, no posturing, no ego. Just cold, clear logic delivered with a smile. That was power. Not the kind that came from guns or money, the kind that came from understanding people, from knowing that most men want to live more than they want to be right, from recognizing that fear works both ways. Razor wanted to scare Bumpy. Instead, Bumpy showed him something scarier, the reality that violence has consequences that last longer than the moment, that reputation is built over years and destroyed in seconds, that walking into a room with 8 guns doesn't make you powerful if you can't walk out alive. 3 months later, Frank heard that Razor had left New York, moved to Philadelphia, started over, never came back to Harlem. Some people said Bumpy scared him off, but Frank knew the truth. Bumpy didn't scare him, Bumpy educated him, showed him that there's a difference between being tough and being smart, that survival isn't about winning every fight, it's about knowing which fights to avoid. In 1968, when Bumpy died, Frank inherited his empire, inherited his reputation, inherited his enemies. But the most valuable thing Bumpy left him wasn't money or connections. It was that night in Small's paradise, the memory of watching an unarmed man face 8 guns and win without firing a shot. Frank tried to live by that lesson. For 5 years he did. Built an empire, made millions, stayed quiet, stayed smart. But then he made a mistake. Wore a chinchilla coat to a boxing match, got noticed, got arrested, lost everything. In prison, Frank had a lot of time to think. He thought about Bumpy, about that night, about the moment Razor walked in with 8 men and Bumpy started laughing. Frank finally understood what the laugh meant. It wasn't confidence, it wasn't bravado, it was recognition. Bumpy was laughing because he saw himself in Razor, saw a younger version of the man he used to be, the man who thought power came from fear. Bumpy had learned, over 40 years, that real power comes from something else, from the ability to make your enemy see that killing you costs more than letting you live, from understanding that respect isn't taken at gunpoint, it's earned through years of being the kind of person people don't want to see die. Razor walked into that restaurant ready to be a killer. He walked out, choosing to be something harder, a man who walked away. And Bumpy let him make that choice, didn't force it, didn't threaten it, just laid out the reality and let Razor decide. That was the lesson. Power isn't about controlling people with fear. It's about giving them enough information to make the choice you want them to make, and then letting them believe it was their idea all along.
Years later, after Frank got out of prison, he was asked in an interview about the most dangerous moment of his life. People expected him to talk about Vietnam, or shootouts, or the night he was almost killed by a rival crew. Instead, he talked about that night in Small's paradise, about watching Bumpy face 8 gunmen without a weapon. The interviewer asked, "Why was that dangerous if nobody got shot?" Frank thought about it, then said, "Because I learned that night that the most dangerous weapon a man can have isn't a gun. It's the ability to stay calm when everyone else is ready to kill." Bumpy Johnson had that weapon, and he used it better than anyone I ever knew. That's why he lived to be 62 in a business where most men die by 30. The interviewer pressed, "But he did die, eventually." Frank nodded. "We all die, but Bumpy died in bed, natural causes. How many gangsters can say that?" The interviewer didn't have an answer. Neither did Frank, because the answer was obvious. Almost none. Bumpy Johnson was an exception, and that night in 1966, with 8 guns pointed at him and 60 people watching, he showed Frank Lucas why. Violence is easy, survival is hard, and the men who understand that difference are the ones who die old. What Frank never told that interviewer
What he never told anyone was what happened after Razor left the club that night. Bumpy had finished his meal in silence, paid the bill, tipped the waitress generously. Then he'd stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door with Frank following. Outside, the November air was cold. The street was quiet. Bumpy stopped on the sidewalk, lit a cigarette, and looked at Frank. "You wanted to shoot him, didn't you?" Frank nodded. "Yes, sir. I had my gun out. I was ready." Bumpy took a long drag, exhaled slowly. The smoke disappeared into the night air. "That's the difference between us, Frank. You were ready to kill him. I was ready to let him live." Frank didn't understand, not then. "What's the difference?" "The difference is I'm still alive after 40 years in this business, and most of the men who were ready to kill are dead." Bumpy started walking. Frank fell into step beside him. They walked 3 blocks in silence before Bumpy spoke again. "You know what the hardest part of tonight was? Staying calm?" "No." Bumpy stopped, looked at Frank. "The hardest part was knowing that if Razor had pulled that trigger, you would have died trying to save me, and I would have had to live with that." Frank felt something shift in his chest. He'd worked for Bumpy for 8 years by that point, driven him, protected him, collected money, delivered messages. But this was the first time Bumpy had acknowledged that Frank's life mattered to him, not as an employee, as a person. Bumpy continued walking. "That's why I don't carry a gun, Frank, because if I did, I might use it. And the moment I use it, I become like them, like Razor, like all the men who think violence is power. And then I lose what actually keeps me alive." "What's that?" "The fact that people don't want me dead. They want me around because I make their lives better. I protect their neighborhood. I help their families. I keep the peace. If I start killing people, I become a problem instead of a solution, and problems get solved." They reached Bumpy's car, a black Cadillac parked under a streetlight. Bumpy turned to face Frank, put a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to run this one day when I'm gone, and when you do, remember tonight. Remember that the men who live longest aren't the toughest, they're the smartest. And smart means knowing that every bullet you fire creates 10 enemies, but every enemy you let walk away might become an ally, or at least they'll leave you alone." Frank nodded. He didn't fully understand, not yet, but he would. Years later, when he was sitting in a prison cell, facing life behind bars, he would remember Bumpy's hand on his shoulder, would remember the November cold, would remember the lesson he'd been too young to appreciate. Violence creates problems. Wisdom solves them. And the difference between the two is the difference between dying at 30 and dying at 62. Bumpy got in the car, started the engine. Frank stood on the sidewalk and watched him drive away, taillights disappearing into the Harlem night, carrying a man who just faced death and turned it into a teaching moment. That was Bumpy Johnson, not a gangster, a philosopher with a criminal past who understood that survival in a violent world didn't require violence. It required something harder. The discipline to stay calm when every instinct screams at you to fight. The wisdom to see 10 moves ahead while your enemy is still thinking about move 1. The courage to laugh when someone points a gun at your head because you've already calculated that fear is his weakness, not yours. Frank never forgot that night, even when he stopped following Bumpy's advice, even when he let pride and ego cloud his judgment, even when he wore that coat and lost everything. The memory stayed with him, a reminder that he'd once sat across from greatness, had watched a masterclass in power, and had been too young, too hungry, too impatient to fully learn the lesson until it was too late.